Good morning, second grade. Today is Tuesday, May 19th, and I'm looking at your matrix, and it says that today we are going to read a book called Pheasant and Kingfisher. And I'm going to show you the book. It's probably different than any other story you've read before. And there are a lot of things I want to explain to you about this book before we read, so it will help you understand the book better. That's called building your background knowledge. Remember all that schema you have in your head? That's the same thing as your background knowledge. And there's a lot I want you to know before we read this book together. So I'm going to do some of that teaching under the camera in just a few minutes. But before I do that, I want to talk to you about what I would like you to do today. If you look on your matrix, it just says to watch the video and to pay close attention to the order of events in the story. So we'll do that in a little bit. It doesn't give you an assignment, but I do have an assignment for you, and it's a fun one. Today you're going to get to do the first page in your memory book. So I would like you to go and get your memory book. Here's the cover. Go get it from your folder, please. And when you open it up, you will find the first page has a title, and the title is In Second Grade. And your memory book is a collection of several pages. If we were in school, we would be doing this together, and there would be some longer writing assignments to go with it, but we had to shorten it a little bit because of the change in our learning since we're doing distance learning, but we still wanted you to have a memory book. Maybe you took a peek already to that last page. Did you see those great pictures of all of you? So we are going to do the first page of the memory book today. And this is what it looks like. And I want to go through it with you. It says in second grade. What I have done is I have written several sentence starters for you. So I have started the sentences, but you have to finish them. And it's very important that you do your very best spelling. So I want you to ask an adult or an older member in your family to help you with your spelling. If you were at school with me, it would be one of those times where I would say, if you're not sure how to spell the word, come up to me and I would write it on a Post-it note, because you're going to keep this memory book for many, many years to come. And I want you to have your best spelling on it. So let's go through the questions. First, it says, my teacher was. You could just write my name on there. The best part about my teacher was. Hopefully you have something nice to say there. The thing I liked best about second grade was. You have room for one or two words here, and then write more words on the next line. One thing I didn't like was. Now that might be hard because there were so many things we liked about second grade, but maybe you didn't like when it was really cold outside at recess. Or maybe you didn't like when we were too loud in the hall and had to go back and practice walking again, or something like that. My favorite subject was. Just write one there. I became better at. You became better at so many things. I can't wait to see all the things you write right there. It was funny when. Can you think of all those funny times when we laughed and the funny jokes that we told and just all the fun we had together? Come up with something funny. At recess, tell about what you did at recess. My favorite field trip was. Now we had two field trips. One was when we went to Matchbox Theater and saw a play. And the other one was when we went to the Hormel Nature Center. And then something I will never forget was. Write about something you would never forget. And here's what I want you to do. If you were in school, I would be so excited to see what you wrote on your memory page, that first page of your memory book. But since we're not in school, there's still a way I can see it. I have made a Seesaw activity. So please go on Seesaw, find the activity. I believe it says memory book page 5-19. And I've taken a picture of the page so you know which activity to choose. And when you are all done, you can color the 4 pictures. I know you have crayons at home now. And I want to see what you wrote. But remember, this is important, so I want you to do your very, very best handwriting, and I want you to have someone help you with the spelling. So work hard on your memory book page, and I can't wait to see how that turned out. And then when you're done, fold it back so that you see the front on the front, and we'll do another memory book page another day. Please do not go ahead. Please wait for more directions on the other pages. So I'll take you one day at a time. So that's your assignment for today. And another thing I want to tell you, let's pretend you're really stuck on maybe this question right here. Well, just skip it. Do the rest of it. And then by the time you come back to it, you probably will have thought of a good answer to that question. Remember that strategy I've taught you before about when you get stuck. Just skip it and come back. And maybe you won't even think of it until hours later. You can go outside and play and then think of the answer and then come back in and write it. Great thinkers do that all the time. They just put a lot of thought into it and come back. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So work hard on that today. And now we will get ready to read The Pheasant and Kingfisher. So when we are in school, second grade, you know we never just jump right into reading a book. Instead, I always make sure you have the background knowledge that you need to be a good comprehender. So I'm going to help provide some of that for you right now. The title of our book is Pheasant and Kingfisher. And the first thing I want you to see is a picture of both of those kinds of birds. This is a picture of a pheasant. A lot of beautiful colors. And this is a picture of a kingfisher. Kingfisher is a beautiful bird as well. They are our two main characters in this story. The focus today is realism and fantasy. So I want to talk to you a little bit about realism and fantasy. The first part of the word realism is real. So you can understand the difference between realism and fantasy by thinking of realism as the things that are real. It says right here, it can happen. And there are some things in this story that can happen, but I think you're going to see more fantasy. And that means it cannot happen. They give you an alien as an example of fantasy. So let's go through that a little more closely. So if a part of the book is considered realism, it can happen. Realism means real. And realism includes stories that are funny, fact-filled, fictional, but have elements that could happen. So we're going to look for some of those elements today. And it's a little bright on my screen, so I'm going to move you over just a little bit here. Okay? Fantasy cannot happen. It means make-believe. And fantasy stories have stories with animals talking or wearing clothes. You might see that today. Magical places or things, and silly characters. Now our characters today, I don't know if they're going to be silly, but I know you will be seeing the animals doing some things that an animal typically could not do. Now the genre of our story today is a myth. Now that's not the same as when I say I miss you. I don't say I myth you. Get it? Myth. A myth is a story that uses fantasy to tell a story. It often tells why or how something came to be. For example, you might be able to read a myth about why the sun is so bright in the sky. A long, long time ago, someone might have used fantasy to make up a story to explain why something is the way it is in nature. And that is a myth. If a myth is about nature, it's also sometimes called a pourquoi tale. Isn't that a cool word? It's a French word, pourquoi. It's a French word for why. So a pourquoi tale are stories that explain why something in the natural world is the way it is. So why something in nature is the way it is. So our myth today is actually a porcupine tale, because you will understand at the end of this story why something is the way it is in nature. Now remember, these stories are fantasy, so they're not full of facts, but they're really interesting to think about and to read. The setting of the story is Australia. And I know you know where Australia is. We found it before on our map. Sometimes it's called the land down under, because when you look at a map, you find it in the southern hemisphere, and it's south of the equator far enough that it's almost like it's going under the globe. People call it the land down under. So here's some vocabulary I want you to understand. I've already shown you a picture of a pheasant and a picture of a kingfisher. Now the oral tradition, that means long, long ago, people did not write down stories. Instead, what they did was they told stories out loud. And parents would tell their children stories. And then when those children grew up and had children, they would tell their children stories. And that kept happening again and again. And that is called the oral tradition. So those are stories. Stories from the oral tradition have been passed down from one generation to another. I talked to you about a porcupine tale. Remember, that means why. So a porcupine tale tells you why something is the way it is in nature. Whew, look at these long words. Now, Aborigines. The Aborigine people are the first people to live on the continent of Australia. And the Aborigines are the people who use that oral tradition to tell the story that I'm going to read to you today. It is believed that the Aborigines traveled from Australia to Asia. And then they soon adapted, remember when you adapt, you change in a way, to live in the wide range of environments that Australia has, from deserts to tropical rainforests. And what they would do is live off the land using what they could to survive. Now, I didn't make this chart. They should have put they learned with an ED there. So I didn't make that chart, but I would have fixed that if I had made that. So here is a picture of an Australian Aborigine, and here's another picture of Aborigines long ago. So those are the first people to live on the continent of Australia. So as we read Pheasant and Kingfisher, I think now you have a better understanding of what you should think about as we read. So just like we do in school, let's start with the blurb on the back. So now you're going to understand these words a little bit better, like Aboriginal. That means the Aborigines. Remember, the first people in Australia. For generations, the Aboriginal people have told a tale of two men who came from the far northwest. One was Book, the pheasant. Do you remember what a pheasant looks like? So the character in our story that is named Book is a pheasant. The other was Barid, the kingfisher. So that's Book, and that's Barid. The story has been recorded by an anthropologist, Catherine Burnt. And Catherine is an anthropologist, and an anthropologist is a person that studies groups of people and their ways of life. So she recorded the story. Remember, it was told orally. People would tell it out loud, but then she recorded it, and she beautifully had it illustrated by an Aboriginal artist, Aaron Raymond Meeks. And those two together, they have preserved this small part of the vast, rich culture of the Aboriginal people to share with you and other readers the world over. Now, boys and girls, the very first time I looked at this book, I did something that a reader should never do. I judged it by its cover. And you should never do that. Have you heard that saying before? Never judge a book by its cover. When I first saw it, I thought, I don't know if my second graders are going to like this story. They might find it a little bit different or odd than what they've read before. But I was wrong. The first time I read it with a group of second graders, they loved it. And so now I get really excited to read it every year to my students. And I'm happy to be able to do that today. Now, this part was written by the illustrator, and here's his picture. And remember that the author on the back told us that he is a relative of the Aboriginal people in Australia. And here's what he says. My childhood memories are of my relatives in Cairns, Australia, telling me many stories about the bush. Sometimes Australia is called the bush. Some of these stories taught me about certain foods called bush tucker. Others taught me about the places I should stay away from because of the dangers there. Still, other stories were similar to pheasant and kingfisher, teaching me how things came to be. Remember, a story that talks about how something came to be is often called a myth, and if it's about nature, it's called a pork-pie tale. Now, these pictures are beautiful. Now, it is a little bit hard for me to get my camera up a little bit higher, but I'm going to try to do that when I can. You might feel it moving around a little bit, but I'll do the best we can. Here we go. Long, long ago, two men came from far in the northwest, from the other side of Bathurst and Melville Islands. One was called Book Book, the pheasant. The other was Bered, Bered, the kingfisher. This one looks a lot like the cover, doesn't it? Both of them carried fire sticks, and as they came along, they set fire to the dry grass. Each night they made camp, and each morning they started off again. They walked on and on with their palm leaf baskets of fresh water to drink when the country was dry. It was a long way to travel, but at last they came to the place they wanted, where bamboo spears grew beside the stream. Now remember, boys and girls, we're thinking about realism and fantasy. So as I read, I want you to think about what could be real and what could be fantasy. They heard the bamboo stems whistling together, and the mosquitoes were thick down by the water, so they camped a little way off on higher ground. They stayed there for a long time. One day they would go hunting and bring back plenty of food. And the next day they would just stay in their camp. Often they would sing and dance together, and they were busy cutting bamboo spears with sharp points and carving spears with strong wooden blades. At last, they had a man called Najalambo. Unless they had a visitor, a man named Najalambo. I left a lot of men back that way, he told them. They are coming to kill you. This place belongs to them, and you should have asked them first before you cut all those bamboos. What are you going to do? They talked together for a while, and the two men gave him food and meat before he went home. Then Book Book and Bered Bered began to get ready. They were both clever men and had plenty of power, and they knew just what to do. Book Book painted himself all over with dark red clay and a little bit of white. Bered Bered painted himself yellow. They made their spears straight and sharp and then sat there waiting. What do you think will happen? Soon, as they watched, they saw a crowd of armed men coming up to them. They stood up and began to throw their spears. But spears were flying all over the camp. There were so many men, all throwing spears, that Book and Bered couldn't dodge them. They grew weak and short of breath. "Let's get away now," they said to each other. It was time for them to use their power. Feathers were starting to come out all over their bodies, and their arms were turning into wings. Now, does that sound like fantasy or realism to you? I want to repeat that paragraph. Feathers were starting to come out all over their bodies, and their arms were turning into wings. Can you guess what they're going to do? Do they look different in that picture? Book put bamboo spears and his spear thrower at his back, and they grew into a wide fan-shaped tail. Bered made his tail from a burning fire stick. Their enemies were trying hard to spear them, but now it was too late. The two men flew away from them, high into the sky. They did not talk like men anymore. Book. Book was a pheasant now. Bered. His friend was a kingfisher. So the call of both of those birds actually sounds like their names, Book and Bered. As they flew, their enemies on the ground below them turned into stone. You can see them there today. But the two men turned into birds, and they still fly about, calling out their own names. So remember that I told you a porcupine tail tells you about why something is the way it is in nature. So this story talked about why those birds, the pheasant and the kingfisher, still call out, and they sound like they're saying their own name, just like in this story. So it explains why their call sounds the way it does. And that is the end of the story. Now tomorrow I am going to have a chart, and it's going to say fantasy and realism. And I'm going to ask you between now and tomorrow to think about what parts of the story were fantasy and what parts were realism. And I'll write some of those down on a chart, and we'll review that a little bit tomorrow. So now, I hope you like that story. Now I'd like you to get out your math packet. So remember, for reading today, there isn't anything written right here about your memory book, but remember that memory book page that I explained at the beginning of my video. So today for math, you are to do the Check My Progress, and you are to complete numbers 1 through 15 on pages 611, 612. So here it is. I'm going to go through it with you, and then you'll do this on your own. Let's read the words together. Minute, analog clock, hour, digital clock, half hour. So fill in the words where they would go. 60 minutes is one blank. 30 minutes is one blank. I know I'm reading fast, but you're going to fill these in later on your own. 60 seconds is one blank. Blank uses only numbers to show time. And blank has an hour hand and a minute hand to show time. Oh, look how easy this is at the bottom. Just write the time shown. And here you're going to draw the hands on each clock and write the time. 8:30, 11 o'clock, 1:30. Remember, the minute hand has to go, say it with me, right through the number. Write the time for numbers 12 and 13. And I will read the brain builder to you and maybe give you a little hint. Kevin has 3 classes in a row. The first 2 classes are each 2 hours long. His third class is 1.5 hours long. Kevin's first class is at 7 o'clock. When will Kevin's last class end? Now, if I was you, I would put a 1 for his first class, 2 for his second class, and a 3 for his third class. And his first class, you know, is at 7 o'clock. And it says that his first 2 classes are 2 hours long. So that's going to be 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. So I did the first part of it for you. See if you can write the times for his second class and his third class. And the time you have for that third class ending is what goes right here. Okay, remember the first 2 are each 2 hours long. And then this third class can only be an hour and a half long. That does take some thinking, but I bet you can get it. And here's the test practice question. The class bell rings every 30 minutes. The first one rings at 8:30. What time will the 4th bell ring? So you could do the same thing again. 1, 2, 3, 4. And write the time for each of the bells, and then you'll know the answer. Remember, the first one is 8:30. So the next one would be 9 o'clock. You can fill in the next 2, and then you'll know the answer. And we will go over those answers tomorrow. Have a wonderful day, second grade. Bye-bye. Have fun with that memory page.